The moment the bank manager tore the check in half, the entire lobby fell into an uneasy silence. The sound of paper ripping echoed louder than it should have, turning a routine morning into something tense and unforgettable. A few customers froze mid-step. Others exchanged confused looks, unsure if what they had just seen was real. The man standing at the counter didn't flinch. No raised voice. No angry gesture. Just calm eyes, steady posture, and a quiet breath. Moments earlier, he had walked in like anyone else. No suit, no entourage, no signs of status. Just simple clothes and a patient demeanor. He waited his turn, greeted the teller politely, and placed a check on the counter without saying much. It should have been an ordinary transaction. But the manager saw it differently. With a smirk that carried more judgment than professionalism, the manager glanced at the check and then at the man. His tone shifted. A few careless remarks followed, subtle enough to sting, loud enough for others to hear. Laughter rippled from one corner of the room, uncomfortable and forced. Then came the moment no one expected. The manager grabbed the check and destroyed it right there, as if to make a point. He acted confident, untouchable, certain that no consequences could reach him behind that polished desk. What he didn't notice was how the room changed. The tellers stopped typing. A security guard straightened his stance. Even the customers who had been distracted by their phones slowly looked up. The man at the counter remained silent. There was something unsettling about his calm, not weakness, not fear, but control. He looked around the room briefly, taking in every face, every reaction. Some people felt it immediately. This situation wasn't going to end the way the manager thought it would. Seconds passed. Long seconds. The manager kept talking, still confident, still unaware. But the tension kept building, thick and heavy, like the air before a storm. No one in that bank knew the full truth yet. No one realized who the quiet man really was. And absolutely no one expected how fast everything was about to change. Because sometimes, the loudest mistake happens right before the truth walks in. And when it does, there's no tearing it up like a piece of paper. The bank itself looked impressive from the outside. Tall glass windows, clean marble floors, and a polished logo that suggested trust and authority. Inside, the atmosphere was busy but controlled. Customers formed neat lines, tellers worked quickly, and soft background music tried to make the long wait feel shorter. It was the kind of place where rules were followed and appearances mattered. At the center of it all was the branch manager. He moved through the lobby with confident strides, greeting certain customers with forced smiles while barely acknowledging others. His suit was sharp, his watch expensive, and his tone carried the belief that this building, and everyone in it, belonged to him. To him, respect wasn't earned, it was demanded. He had been in charge for years and believed nothing unexpected could happen on his watch. That belief would soon be tested. Late that morning, the glass doors opened again, and a man stepped inside quietly. No one turned their head at first. He didn't rush. He didn't look around nervously. He simply entered, took a number, and waited like everyone else. The man was Chuck Norris. But in that moment, he wasn't the global icon people recognized from movies or headlines. He wore simple jeans, a plain jacket, and comfortable shoes. No bodyguards. No assistants. No need for attention. His face was calm, almost thoughtful, as if he had all the time in the world. When his number was called, he approached the counter with the same quiet confidence. He greeted the teller politely and reached into his jacket, pulling out a folded check. His movements were slow and respectful, showing no sign of entitlement or impatience. The teller glanced at the check and hesitated. She looked at the name again, then up at the man's face. There was confusion in her expression, not suspicion, more like surprise she didn't fully understand. Before she could say anything, the manager noticed the pause from across the room. He walked over, curiosity mixed with irritation. "What seems to be the problem?" he asked, loud enough for nearby customers to hear. The teller explained softly that the transaction needed approval. The manager took the check, barely glancing at the details before letting out a short laugh. His eyes traveled from the check to Chuck's clothing, then back again. The judgment was instant. "This counter is for serious clients," he said dismissively. "Not people wasting our time." A few customers shifted uncomfortably. The teller looked down, unsure how to respond. Chuck Norris remained calm. He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He simply listened, giving the manager his full attention. His expression didn't change, but there was a quiet awareness behind his eyes, the kind that comes from someone who has faced pressure before and doesn't need to prove anything. The manager mistook that silence for weakness. He straightened his shoulders, speaking louder now, enjoying the attention. In his mind, he was reinforcing order, reminding everyone who held authority in this space. He believed status could be read from clothing and confidence from volume. What he didn't realize was that several people in the lobby were starting to sense something was off. There was no fear in Chuck's posture. No desperation in his voice. Just patience. And in places like this, patience often means someone knows more than they're saying. The setup was complete. Two men standing at the same counter. One convinced of his power. The other completely aware of his. And the difference between them was about to become impossible to ignore. The tension didn't explode all at once. It crept in slowly, settling over the bank like a heavy shadow. What had started as an uncomfortable exchange was now something deeper, something that made people uneasy without fully understanding why. The manager held the check between his fingers, tapping it against the counter as if it were worthless. He smirked again, shaking his head in disbelief. To him, this wasn't a misunderstanding, it was an opportunity to assert control. "You know," he said loudly, "we see people like this every day. Walk in, try their luck, hope no one notices." A few customers glanced at Chuck Norris, then quickly looked away. No one wanted to be involved. Silence felt safer. Chuck met the manager's gaze calmly. "I'm just here to handle my business," he replied evenly. "Nothing more. Nothing less." That calm response seemed to irritate the manager even more. He leaned forward, lowering his voice just enough to sound threatening without actually crossing a line. "This isn't the place for games. If you don't belong here, it's better to leave quietly." The teller's hands trembled slightly as she pretended to organize papers. She knew something was wrong, but hierarchy kept her silent. The security guard near the door watched closely, sensing the shift in energy. Then the manager did something that pushed the moment past the point of comfort. He laughed, sharp and dismissive, and held the check up for others to see. "This," he scoffed. "This means nothing here." With a deliberate motion, he tore it in half. The sound cut through the room. A woman in line gasped. Someone whispered, "Did he just do that?" Chuck Norris didn't move. The manager, now fully committed, fed the torn pieces into the shredder behind the counter. He watched as the paper disappeared, as if performing a final act to make his authority unquestionable. "There," he said. "Problem solved." But the problem wasn't solved. It had just begun. The silence that followed was different, heavier, sharper. The manager seemed to sense it too, though he didn't understand why. He straightened his tie, trying to regain the rhythm of a normal workday. Chuck slowly looked around the lobby. He noticed the discomfort on people's faces, the way some avoided eye contact, the way others watched closely, waiting. When he finally spoke again, his voice was steady, almost gentle. "That wasn't necessary," he said. "No accusation. No threat. Just truth." The manager scoffed. "Necessary or not, it's done." He turned away, signaling the end of the conversation. But something unexpected happened. The security guard shifted closer to the counter. One of the tellers froze, staring at her screen, unsure what to do next. A low murmur spread among the customers, not loud, but constant, like a distant warning. The manager felt it now. He turned back slowly, his confidence no longer as solid as before. There was something about the way Chuck stood, grounded, unshaken, that didn't fit the story he had created in his head. For the first time, doubt crept in. Who stays this calm after being humiliated? Who doesn't argue when they're wronged? The answer lingered in the air, unspoken. And as the seconds passed, the manager began to realize that his loudest moment of control might have been his biggest mistake, because the truth was already moving closer, and there would be no shredding it away. The reaction didn't come in shouting or chaos. It came in silence, the kind that presses against your ears and makes every small movement feel too loud. For a few long seconds, no one spoke. Customers who had been impatient just moments earlier now stood completely still. A man near the door slowly lowered his phone, realizing he had been recording without even thinking about it. A woman clutched her purse closer to her chest, eyes fixed on the counter as if she couldn't look away. Behind the desk, the tellers were frozen. One of them swallowed hard, her fingers hovering above the keyboard. Another stared at the floor, cheeks flushed with embarrassment, not her own, but the kind that spreads when someone in authority goes too far. They felt trapped between procedure and conscience, unsure whether to intervene or stay invisible. The security guard took a careful step forward. Not aggressively. Not defensively. Just enough to be ready. The manager noticed the shift, even if he didn't fully understand it. He cleared his throat and forced a laugh, trying to brush off the moment as nothing more than routine discipline. But the sound came out thin, hollow. "All right," he said, clapping his hands once. "Let's move along. Next customer." No one moved. That was when he realized something was wrong. Chuck Norris still stood at the counter, calm and composed, hands resting loosely at his sides. He wasn't staring the manager down. He wasn't demanding attention. He was simply there, steady, unbothered, and unmistakably present. His calm made people uneasy in a way anger never could. A few customers exchanged glances, silently questioning what they had just witnessed. One man shook his head slowly, as if trying to process how quickly the mood had changed. Another whispered, "That wasn't right," barely loud enough to hear. The manager shifted his weight. For the first time, he felt exposed, not threatened, but observed. Every eye in the lobby was on him now, not with fear, but with judgment. The authority he relied on felt thinner, less certain. He straightened his jacket again, repeating the gesture out of habit, but it no longer had the same effect. Chuck finally spoke, his voice low and even. "I came here expecting professionalism," he said. "That's all." The words weren't loud, but they landed hard. No accusations. No insults. Just a statement of expectation and disappointment. The reaction was immediate. A teller looked up sharply, as if those words gave shape to what she'd been feeling all along. The security guard's posture relaxed slightly, reassured by the absence of aggression but alert to the seriousness of the moment. The manager opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. For the first time since this began, he didn't know what to say. The lobby felt different now, no longer under his control, but under the weight of shared awareness. Everyone understood that something important was unfolding, not through force, but through presence. Chuck's calm had shifted the balance. The manager glanced toward his office, then back at the counter. His confidence, once loud and effortless, now required effort just to maintain. He nodded stiffly, more to himself than to anyone else. The moment hung there, unresolved, heavy, waiting. Because reactions don't always come as noise or action. Sometimes, the strongest reaction is when a room collectively realizes that respect has been crossed. And it can't be ignored anymore. The glass doors at the front of the bank opened again, and this time, the sound cut through the silence like a signal. Heads turned almost instinctively. A man in a tailored suit stepped inside, his expression tense, his movements urgent. He wasn't a customer waiting in line. His posture carried authority of a different kind. It was the regional executive. He scanned the lobby quickly, eyes locking onto the manager behind the counter. For a brief moment, confusion crossed his face. Then he saw Chuck Norris standing there, calm, unbothered, and his expression changed completely. He stopped walking. The color drained from his face. Without hesitation, he adjusted his tie and moved quickly toward the counter, ignoring the line of customers entirely. The murmurs in the lobby grew softer, curiosity replacing discomfort. The manager straightened when he saw the executive approach. Relief flickered across his face. Support had arrived, or so he thought. "Sir," the manager began confidently, "we were just handling a situation." The executive raised a hand. "Stop," he said quietly. That single word carried more weight than all the manager's earlier shouting. The executive turned to Chuck Norris, his voice respectful, almost careful. "Mr. Norris, I didn't realize you were visiting us today." The manager froze. His eyes darted from the executive to Chuck and back again, searching for context that no longer made sense. A faint smile lingered on his face, now completely out of place. He stammered. You mean, this gentleman? The executive nodded once. Yes. That gentleman. The lobby seemed to inhale at the same time. The executive continued, his tone calm but firm. Mr. Norris is not only one of our most valued clients, he's also one of the primary investors who helped fund this entire branch. The words landed like a shockwave. A teller's eyes widened. A customer let out a quiet gasp. The security guard stiffened, instantly alert. The manager's face went pale. He looked down at the counter, then toward the shredder behind him, as if the truth might somehow rewind the last few minutes. His confident posture collapsed inward, shoulders dropping, hands trembling slightly. Chuck Norris didn't react. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He didn't even acknowledge the reveal. That silence spoke louder than any victory ever could. The executive glanced at the shredder, then back at the manager. He didn't need to ask what had happened. The torn remains of the check were enough. I believe, the executive said carefully, an apology is appropriate. The manager swallowed hard. His voice, once loud and commanding, came out thin. Mr. Norris, I wasn't aware. I made a mistake. Chuck finally looked at him. Awareness, Chuck said calmly, shouldn't change how people are treated. The room went completely still again. Those words reframed everything. This wasn't about money. It wasn't about status. It was about character. The executive nodded slowly, understanding the deeper meaning. The manager looked as though he had been struck, not by anger, but by truth. The reveal was complete. Not just of who Chuck Norris was, but of who the manager had shown himself to be. And how quickly power disappears when respect is missing. The bank no longer felt like the same place it had been an hour earlier. The sharp edges of authority had softened, replaced by a quiet awareness that something meaningful had just occurred. People weren't whispering anymore. They were thinking. The executive took a slow breath and addressed the manager, his voice controlled but unmistakably firm. He didn't raise his tone, yet every word carried consequence. This situation will be reviewed, he said. But what matters right now is how we move forward. The manager nodded stiffly, unable to meet anyone's eyes. The confidence that once defined him was gone, replaced by something closer to humility, or at least the beginning of it. He stepped back from the counter, making space in a way he never had before. Chuck Norris remained calm, as he had been from the start. He turned slightly toward the tellers, offering them a small, reassuring nod. It wasn't dramatic, but it mattered. It acknowledged the pressure they'd been under and released it without words. One of them exhaled deeply, shoulders finally relaxing. Chuck spoke again, not as an investor, not as a public figure, but as a person. I didn't come here to prove anything, he said. I came here to do business. What happened today shows how easily respect can be lost, and how hard it is to regain. No one interrupted. No one needed to. The executive listened closely, nodding in agreement. Customers nearby leaned in slightly, aware that this was no longer just a bank transaction. It was a moment of reflection playing out in real time. The manager finally looked up. I was wrong, he said quietly. Not because of who you are, but because of how I acted. It wasn't a perfect apology, but it was honest. Chuck accepted it with a simple nod. No lecture. No triumph. Just acknowledgement. The executive instructed another staff member to assist Chuck with his transaction immediately and professionally. The process was handled smoothly, respectfully, and without unnecessary attention. It was how it should have been from the beginning. As the paperwork was completed, the atmosphere in the lobby began to shift again, this time toward calm. People returned to their places in line, though with a different energy. Something had changed, not just in policy, but in perspective. Before leaving, Chuck paused near the exit. He turned back to the room and said one final thing, his voice steady and sincere. Titles, money, and power come and go. Character is what stays when everything else is stripped away. No one clapped. No one needed to. The words settled naturally, like a truth people already knew but rarely saw demonstrated so clearly. As Chuck walked out, the glass doors closing softly behind him, the manager stood still, absorbing the weight of what had happened. This wasn't a public humiliation. It was something deeper, a lesson delivered without force, without anger, and without spectacle. And long after the bank returned to its normal rhythm, that lesson remained. Respect should never depend on recognition. Because the way you treat someone before you know their worth reveals your own. As the doors of the bank closed and the normal sounds of the street returned, the moment didn't end, it followed everyone who witnessed it. People didn't rush back to their routines right away. They stood for a few extra seconds, some staring at the floor, others looking at the counter where everything had unfolded. It was clear this wasn't just a story about a check or a mistake. It was a moment that made people reflect. Stories like this stay with us because they touch something familiar. Almost everyone has experienced being judged too quickly. By appearance. By accent. By clothing. By silence. And just as many have witnessed someone misuse authority, believing position alone grants permission to disrespect others. What happened inside that bank wasn't loud or violent. It was quiet, human, and revealing. That's why this moment matters. Not because of who Chuck Norris is, but because of how he responded. He didn't escalate. He didn't humiliate. He didn't demand special treatment once the truth was revealed. Instead, he allowed the situation to teach its own lesson, one rooted in dignity and restraint. And that's something worth thinking about. How often do we decide who deserves respect before knowing anything about them? How often do we mistake silence for weakness? And how often do we confuse power with volume? This story reminds us that real strength doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need approval. It simply exists, steady, controlled, and aware. If you were standing in that bank, what would you have done? Would you have spoken up when things felt wrong? Would you have stayed silent, hoping it would pass? Or would you have learned something about yourself in the process? These are the kinds of questions that stay long after the moment ends. And now, we want to hear from you. Backhand index pointing right. Do you think respect should ever depend on someone's status or appearance? Backhand index pointing right. Have you ever witnessed a situation where power was misused, or handled with quiet dignity? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your perspective might help someone else see things differently. If this story made you pause, reflect, or rethink how everyday interactions matter, let us know by typing respect in the comments. Sometimes a single word says more than a long explanation. And if you believe that calm character is stronger than loud authority, type dignity below. This channel exists to share moments that challenge assumptions, not with outrage, but with insight. Not to shock, but to reveal. Every story here is a reminder that the smallest interactions often expose the biggest truths. If you enjoy stories that highlight self-control, humility, and real-life lessons, consider subscribing. New videos are shared regularly, each one designed to make you think, not just watch. Before you go, take a second to reflect on this. The way someone treats another person when no one is watching. Before titles are known. Before status is revealed. Before power shifts. That is who they truly are. If this message resonates with you, like the video and share it with someone who values respect over ego. You never know who might need to hear it today. Thanks for watching. Stay thoughtful. Stay grounded. And remember, character speaks, even when words are quiet.